Good morning, everyone. I trust you are doing well and keeping safe and healthy in this early June, early summer. Today is Shotsuki Hoyo, and I'd like to say a few words about that in my Dharma message. But it's June. It's the beginning of summer. And actually, it's a lull in the Buddhist liturgical calendar. We don't have a special service in June. While living in Kyoto, I dreaded June because of the coming of Tsuyu, the rainy or monsoon season. The monsoon rains move up northward, up the Japanese archipelago, and Tsuyu means Tao Wei, rice planting. In Okinawa, the monsoon rain is referred to urizun. The expression marks early summer between the cool of spring and the heat of summer. It also, for the Okinawans, the humid rain signals the return of their menfolk who left 6 months earlier on trading missions to Siam, present-day Thailand, Malacca, Aceh, and Pagan in Indonesia. This morning, I want to share with you some thoughts on stories in a long feature article that appeared on the 30 May 2021 Sunday Review section of the New York Times. It was an article by Salam Ruchi, who writes on the importance of stories. You'll recall that the publication in 1998 of the Satanic Verses stirred major controversy for its irreverent depiction of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. Salam Rushdie received death threats, including a fatwa calling for his assassination by the Ayatollah Khomeini. The essay, "The Stories We Love Make Us Who We Are," was adapted from The Languages of Truth, Essays 2003 to 2020. And this essay prompted me to reflect on the stories I loved growing up and that my daughter asked me to repeatedly read to her, and of course, the many stories of the Buddha. Salam Rushdie writes that the stories we love become part of the way in which we understand things and make judgments and choices in our daily lives. If Rushdie is correct, the novels we choose to read, or more importantly, the stories we repeatedly hear, are powerful influences on our being and on our behavior. The first stories, of course, were oral, told before a live audience, before they were written down. And many of the stories that we have in the Buddha, or recounting the early Buddhist episodes that appear in the Agamas and the Nikayas, were transmitted orally before they were written down about 200 or 300 years after the Buddha passed away. I remember most vividly my stories, the stories my mother related of her parents and her father's ancestors. Here we recall my mother was kuchihacho. She was good in speaking and an excellent storyteller. My ancestors on my father's side and my mother's side ventured from their little village and homeland to Hawaii and to establish a new life for themselves and, of course, for their progeny. They were brave. They took great risks. Thanks to their courage, I am here, and I have relatives on mainland Japan, throughout South America, and other parts of the world. My great-grandmother was in Davao, Mindanao, and the Philippines when the war ended in 1945. Others were stranded in Korea and in Taiwan. It was good that they ventured from home. Had they remained, the men folks surely would have been killed in the battle for Okinawa. As a result of their courage and risk-taking, there are now more Nakasones outside of Okinawa and Japan. I suppose the example of my ancestors' risk-taking and courage led me dragging along Mrs. Nakasone to leave our jobs in Hawaii and leave our homes to go to Kyoto, where I was determined to pursue the Buddha Dharma. One day before he left, Irene's mother asked her, "Irene, why are you going?" It was a big risk, of course. Kyoto was a place we knew no one and had to make our life for ourselves. We did not know what the future held or the chances of success. But our time in Kyoto changed our lives. I was fortunate to meet many great Buddhist teachers. I met Shuryu Morita, my calligraphy sensei, whose craft and art I brought back to America, and am sharing those results, what I learned in the many exhibitions that I've been having. From these teachers, I learned that dedication and perseverance is first and foremost. My Kendo sensei impressed me on the importance of personal integrity. These lessons served me well. In Kyoto, we met a family from my ancestral village in Okinawa. The family was very generous with their love of Okinawa and their culture. But before I speak about Buddhist stories, I should mention some of the stories my daughter asked me to read repeatedly. I recall she liked Goodnight Moon, The Runaway Bunny, and the Kuma-chan series. Goodnight Moon and The Runaway Bunny were quite special for her, it seems. Goodnight Moon is about a little bunny who said goodnight to various objects and living things in her bedroom. The Runaway Bunny, in The Runaway Bunny, the bunny tells his mother that he will run away. And the mother says, if he runs away, she will find him. Both books were written by Margaret Wise Brown and illustrated by Clement Hurd. For a child, the familiarity of objects in the bedroom, and the mother will always find her if she runs away, must be reassuring. The books may be overly sentimental, but comforting for a child. Kuma-chan is a book series we came across while we were living in Kyoto. Heather spent her second year of life there in Kyoto with us. It's about, the Kuma-chan series is about 12 months in the Japanese year. It is kawaii, very charming. I'm not sure why she took to that, but I would read these books over and over for her. Having a child changed the patterns of our lives. With Heather in tow, when I went to a bookstore, I no longer visited the Buddhist book section, but now I had to visit the children's section also. We in Kyoto, while living in Kyoto, we even visited the zoo, a small zoo, but nonetheless, without Heather, we would not have visited the zoo. Our ventures in Kyoto shaped our lives. These treasured adventures are now stories we share with our daughter. And these stories surface from time to time in my Dharma messages. I heard many stories while studying at the Ryukoku University. Some famous, and some not so famous. The story of the Buddha, of course, is the most famous. Siddhartha Gautama's search for understanding, its cause led him to leave home, Yasodhara his wife, and Rahula his infant son. He left his princely station. He wandered in the jungles with the wind and rain for companions, and engaged in austerities that almost took his life. All this in pursuit of the truth through which he could transcend suffering and attain spiritual liberation. This is a story that countless Buddhists over the past 2,500 years have relished, retold, and celebrated. The Theravada Buddhists celebrate his birth and enlightenment and his passing at Vesak on the full moon of the second month of the Indian monsoon calendar. The Northern Buddhists, which includes this temple, observes the birth of the Buddha on Hanamatsuri in April, the Enlightenment on Bodhi Day in December, and his passing on Nirvana Day in February. This liturgical celebrations or observances reminds us that we are Buddhists. Prince Siddhartha's spiritual search is one of courage and risk-taking. He did not know his outcome of his search. He meets and masters the techniques and goals of his first two teachers, Aranda Kalama and Uttara Brahmaputra, who probably represents the foremost meditation teachers of his time, and who invite him to take over their respective movements and followers. Instead, the prince chooses to leave. He took a big risk a second time, leaving his teachers. He did not know whether or if there was another way forward, or whether this move, or if his move would lead to a new discovery. He experimented with extreme austerities, almost costing his life. He was on the verge of death until Sujata offers some rice gruel. Her offerings nursed him to health and eventually to the discovery of a new path forward and a new spiritual landscape. The prince, Siddhartha, the future Buddha, was supported in his spiritual quest by many. To be sure, he trained with his meditation masters, but these personalities represent the many teachers he must have encountered. The famous and not so famous. After his enlightenment, he sought out his former teachers, believing that they would understand and be receptive to his spiritual breakthrough. And Sujata represents the many people who offered material support. That is, food and clothing and shelter during his spiritual quest. I should add that the meditation techniques were supported by the moral life. The spiritual quest which the Buddha introduced to us, begins with the moral life. In a retort to Mara, the Lord of Darkness, Siddhartha says, with a mind that is true and thoughts that are upright, I shall put to rest your desires, lust, aversion, hunger, thirst, craving, sloth, fearfulness, doubt, vanity, and ostentancy, fame and profit, and self-praise. I shall travel throughout the world, and train numerous disciples. And if they train diligently, follow my teachings, and attain desirelessness, in the end, sorrow will be no more. The stories of the Buddha reinforce what we believe, who we should be, and what we should be doing. We believe in the search for truth, that reality is transient, and we should work out our personal salvation with diligence. As the stories of Kisagotami and Ubidi relate, death is universal. We all mourn the passing of a child, but as the Buddha tells us, we must not let grief dominate our lives. We must mourn, but we must also let go of our grief. We must remember the pain and loneliness that grief brings, but by remembering our griefs, we can empathize with others who are grieving. The story of the Buddha and his ministry tells us who we are. We are members of the family of humanity. Everyone, we all have a responsibility for supporting our extended family. Not only must we support the family of humanity, but we must be kind and gentle to every living being, and begin the container world that supports all life. This is what the story of the Buddha tells us. The story of the Buddha and his ministry tells us who we are. We are members of the family of humanity. We all have a responsibility for supporting this extended family. Not only must we support the family of humanity, but we must be kind and gentle to every living being, and the container world, that is our world, that supports life, that supports all life. This is what the story of the Buddha is about. The story of the Buddha and his ministry is a heroic venture. It is a story of humanity's search for understanding of life, of understanding our place within the generations. It is a story of our place in this vast world. It is the story that we must relive time and again. It is our human story. Today, we observe Shotsuki Hoyo, remembering our relatives and friends who passed away in the month of June. To remember is to honor their lives and their sacrifices. To remember is to offer our gratitude for them, for their sacrifices, for shaping our lives, and of course, of who we are. I hope you heard these stories. I was fortunate. My mother repeated these stories over and over again. But I was grateful for these stories. My relatives and ancestors took great risks, and their courage to endure the unexpected whims of nature and of governments and of society that buffeted their lives. We honor their sacrifices by remembering. We also recall the stories of the Buddha. The Buddha's story is a heroic struggle of good over evil, a struggle of transcending suffering, a struggle of wisdom over ignorance, of compassion over indifference. Let the stories of our ancestors inspire us to improve our lives and that of our progeny. Let the stories of the Buddha inspire us to transform our ego vision into omnivision. Let us pass these stories to others so they too can be inspired to avoid evil, to do good, and purify the mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas of the past, present, and future. Thank you very much. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.